call- calling on all people to reflect on the legacy of colonialism and commit to reconciliation and justice. And so, for those of us who are engaged in promoting and delivering nurse family partnership, regardless of what country or territory or state we're in, we are reminded of the power of relationships, trust, and culturally safe care. The work of nurses in this program is deeply aligned with the spirit of reconciliation, listening, walking alongside, and empowering families through respectful and trauma and violence informed care. To our international colleagues, thank you for being here. Your presence today is part of a global movement to ensure that nursing care is not only clinically excellent, but socially just. And let us carry the spirit of today forward, not just in words, but in our actions. And so as we reflect on the importance of early relationships and the lasting impact of childhood experiences, I'm struck by how deeply these themes resonate with the research we'll be exploring and learning about today. Childhood shapes so much of who we become, and this is especially evident in how young women navigate the journey into motherhood. So today we'll hear from Dr. Hen Otley, whose research offers a deeply insightful lens into this transition. Drawing on qualitative and psychoanalytic child psychotherapy approaches, Dr. Otley explores how early relational experiences shape the emotional development of adolescent mothers. Her work is grounded in the voices and experiences of young women from the Family Nurse Partnership in the United Kingdom. And we are so grateful to those young individuals who generously shared their stories of childhood, family, and the complex dynamics that influence their path to motherhood. Dr. Otley brings a unique perspective as a British child and adolescent psychotherapist with a background in midwifery and nurse home visitation. Her curiosity for this topic was sparked by hearing young women speak of a powerful desire to become mothers, often misunderstood or oversimplified by others. This led her to explore the deeper, sometimes unconscious motivations behind early motherhood, ultimately guiding her towards psychotherapy. Dr. Otley, we are so honored to have you here with us today to share this compelling research, to give us insights into these experiences, and to prompt some deep questions for reflection in our work and the implications for practice. So over to you, Dr. Otley. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for that very warm introduction. And it does feel like a privilege to be speaking to you all about my research, as well as to be doing it on this important Orange Shirt Day. And what you said, Sue, about the importance of relationships and stories in everyone's experience really resonates with what I want to talk to you about today. So I'm going to talk about my research, which is what can young mothers' accounts of their childhood relationships tell us about why they became parents? And as you've outlined, there's a bit of a story behind my research. When I was working as a teenage pregnancy midwife in England and then a family nurse, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm going to muddle up NFP, FNP all the time, but you know what I mean. I became really curious about what might bring someone to become a mother in adolescence, a time when her body has the capacity to produce a baby, but she might not in other ways be at a time in her life when she's quite emotionally ready for motherhood. And in my work, I kept hearing young women talk about this need to become a mother, which really didn't seem to be born of ignorance. And the ignorance that I was hearing seemed to come from other people's often very loudly expressed assumptions about why teenagers become mothers that just didn't fit with the very thoughtful young women that I was meeting. And so I was curious to understand more about the deep-seated longings and what purpose becoming a mother might be fulfilling for people. So I started training as a child psychotherapist at the Tavistock in London. And part of the training involves doctoral research. And I very quickly knew what question I wanted to return to, which was this question. about young mothers and what would lead them into motherhood, one young woman rather than another. And the research offered me an opportunity to explore these links between childhood relationships and adolescent motherhood. And bringing a psychoanalytic lens also offered a way to consider aspects of ourselves that can impact so powerfully on our lives and choices in both conscious and unconscious ways. And it was very clear to me that to recruit participants, I would turn to the NFP for various reasons. Firstly, because I knew about, from my own work, the nurse-client relationship and how valuable that is. And so I knew that if in my interviewing I was stirring up difficult feelings, then there would be someone who this young person would have a relationship with that they could take their worries to, their family nurse. And I also knew enough about the relationship and the program to know that this would not be the first time that this person would be reflecting on her childhood relationships. And most importantly, perhaps, I trusted that the nurses would be very wise people to filter which clients would be appropriate for me to interview, which clients would be in the right place and would be safe for me to interview. So my huge appreciation goes out to the Family Nurse Partnership for their support. And of course, mainly to the young mothers participating in my research and telling me their stories. I think it's important to hold in mind the double crisis that we can think of adolescence as, of adolescence and motherhood as, when they come together. So we've got the emotional turmoil of puberty and the emotional turmoil of pregnancy becoming interlocked. And it's a time when we might think about the unresolved issues that are being reactivated. And it's a very fertile time for them to become addressed and thought about. So in the Nurse Family Partnership, it's all about connection, I think, and the consistent therapeutic relationship between the nurse and the client being so fundamental. And this really resonates with my findings because all of the participants conveyed in different ways senses of not having been held in their mother's mind quite enough. And that made me think about the vital importance of the really reliable experience of being held in a family nurse's mind. And before I move on to the next slide, I just want to say that my years training as a child and adolescent psychotherapist and my subsequent work and my doctoral research have really developed and enriched my understanding of the complex and crucial importance of what I was offering as a family nurse and the Family Nurse Partnership Programme, stuff that I didn't necessarily fully appreciate at the time. So I understand this might be the first piece of qualitative research which is being presented in these webinars. And these look like pretty dull slides, but while I tell you the story of my research, I'll leave you with a couple of dull slides to emphasize the meticulousness of the stages of interpretative phenomenological analysis, which is quite a significant undertaking as well as difficult to say. So it involved a very thorough ethics process, the recruitment, as I described, via the family nurses with a strong focus on informed consent, me designing a few open questions to begin the stories being told and continue the conversation, and for the in-depth interviews, asking about the participants' childhood experiences and particularly their relationships, and then all of the analysis of the interviews that followed. So I interviewed, having recruited 5 participants, which doesn't sound like very many, but it was still quite a major undertaking. And I've changed all the names in this, of course, for reasons of confidentiality. And it may interest you to know that to publish the research, I then contacted the participants again for their additional consent to try to avoid any unpleasant surprises for people. Only one of them was interested in speaking to me further about this, and it's the one I'm calling Megan. And it was very satisfying to find out how much the interview had meant to her at the time, a few years earlier, and to find out how interested she was in my thinking about her interview. So I'm going to tell you briefly about each of the participants as her life was at the time of the interview. And this is in order to put in context some of the sense that I made of each participant's accounts. And I'm imagining that many of you listening are working as family nurses or supervisors. And I'm thinking that as I talk, there may be aspects of these women's lives which are quite familiar to you. And there are obviously some overlaps between my participants in the themes that come up. But I really wanted to emphasize as well how each participant was sharing her entirely unique story. But I'm just thinking it could be interesting to think in your mind as I'm talking about which aspects might resonate or bring to mind aspects of the clients that you're working with or have worked with. As I talk about each participant, I'll show you the themes that I reached from her particular interview data. And the clients who were recruited because of the recruitment process via the nurses all ended up being white British, just for information. So first of all, there was Natalie. She was 20 when I interviewed her, and she'd had a pregnancy termination when she was 16 and then become a mother when she was 19. She was the only one of the 5 who had been a looked after child, a child in care. And she'd been the youngest of many children removed from her biological mother's care because of abuse and neglect. She was 4 when she was adopted alongside her biological sister, and her adoptive parents were still together. Natalie described a really challenging relationship with her mum, as well as strongly competitive feelings with her sister over her mother. She lived with her baby, and she was in an on-off relationship with her baby's father. And throughout her account, there were really important feelings conveyed about feelings she didn't truly belong. It seemed to me that the failure of her own early mothering had left her quite confused and yearning to recreate something new for herself, and that this craving might have been answered by her having a baby. Ellie was the youngest of several children, and she was part of a large family which seemed to be producing many babies. She was 18 when I interviewed her, and she was 16 when she'd given birth. And when I spoke with her, she'd had a recent loss of pregnancy through miscarriage. She lived with her baby near her extended family, also a very large family. She described often feeling quite overlooked in her family, where there were so many children, and there was quite a lot of generational muddle. For instance, she had nieces who were older than her. When she spoke to me in the interview, she spoke really rapidly, without many pauses, and it felt as if she was worried that my attention might drift off if she didn't hold it. And in fact, I found it quite hard to focus on what she was telling me, and I wondered whether it was as if I was being the uninterested mother that she was anticipating. Ellie had stayed in a relationship with her baby's father, but they lived separately. And her parents, when I interviewed her, were still together, but in a really ambivalent seeming relationship. Megan had been 18 when I interviewed her, and she had had her baby when she was 17. Remarkably, she had only known her boyfriend, who was several years older than her, for less than a week when she got pregnant. She was still together with him, and in fact, they were still together when I spoke with her about publishing my research a few years later. She had got pregnant during the time when she had been working really hard and without success in order to try to keep her separating parents together. She lived with her boyfriend's family, and she had formed a close relationship with his mother that she really valued. One really major event in Megan's life had been the experience when she was 13 of finding out with her older sister that they both had different fathers. And this had caused a really painful family rift, which had eventually resulted in Megan's parents separating. Around this time, she'd also had health issues, which meant that she'd missed quite a lot of her education for about a year and a half. And a strong theme in her account was her envy of her mother and her sister's close relationship, from which she felt really cut out. When I interviewed Jade, she was 19, and she was expecting her second baby 2 weeks after the interview, although she'd also told me that she'd never wanted to have children. She'd become a mother when she was 17, and at the interview, her new partner, who was in his 30s, was her second child's father. Jade also had a really large family, and she was living close in amongst them, and she'd grown up amongst them, and she was the middle child between siblings with mental health conditions which required a lot of their mother's attention. Her mother also has significant health difficulties, both physical health and mental health, which seemed to have needed her mum to come first in everybody's minds. And she was also separated from the stepfather who brought her up, and sadly this stepfather was now terminally ill. As with Ellie, there was a strong sense with Jade of her having had to adapt herself to her mother's needs from very early on, to provide rather than receive maternal care when she was a child. Jade had to manage alone for many years because of her mum's poor health. An important aspect of Jade's account and her experience was the extensive and often overwhelming feeling description she gave me of having a mother who's a hoarder. She described a flood of unmanageable emotional clutter, as well as a tide of her grandmother's belongings that just didn't seem to be able to be let go of. And finally, Zoe. Unlike the other participants, Zoe described a particularly close and loving family. She was 20 when I interviewed her, and she lived at home with her parents and her older sister, who was unwell with an eating disorder. Zoe was in a really long-standing relationship with her boyfriend, and she'd become a mum at 19. She told me that her mother was a teenager when her two half-brothers were born, and then her mum had given birth to Zoe and her sister later in life. It seems she was really, really worried about her mother, her father, and her sister's illnesses. And Zoe also had her own ongoing health conditions. She actually let me know she'd had a worry that she'd needed to give her parents a grandchild before it was too late. So I'm now going to start sharing my 4 major themes and the subordinate themes in each of these, including as much as I can some of what the participants told me so we can hear their voices. What was really striking was the absolute and unexpected centrality of mothers throughout the data. And this seemed to be embodied a bit in Natalie's quote when she was dismissing my interest in her father by saying, "The mother does everything." So you'll see that both of my first 2 themes are about mothers. The first one is about possessing a mother. Mum was the primary key word, mum and then mother, which was identified by the transcription technology that I used to help me with the lengthy task of transcribing. But what was so striking was that even though mum and mother were used so often, the participants almost never used it, meaning themselves as a mother. They meant it to talk about their own mothers. And as I'm presenting to you at the NFP, I think it's really important to keep in mind as I talk the impact that we see of the mother's unresolved needs on her baby's experience of being mothered. So this first major theme, all about mothers, possessing a mother, this preoccupation with mothers, which runs through the first 2 major themes, the important problems of first truly belonging with, and then the difficulties of then separating from a mother, this possessing of a mother might even be thought about as being possessed by an idea of mothering, quite fixated by it, or overwhelmed. The first sub-theme in this one is the emotional deprivation in the absence of good enough mothering, which was so evocatively described, sadly, by Natalie, who told me of her birth mum. My actual mum is a drug addict. She has like 20 kids. Me and my sister were left alone by ourselves most of the time. And Ellie told me, talking about her childhood, I just felt empty. I was so alone. I think that was the problem. Jade, who had experienced a mum who had tried a few times to end her own life, told me I was worried about her and what she was going to do, or if she was okay, if she wasn't okay. Megan, who was so frustrated at trying to get from her mother, which just something that just didn't seem to be on offer, said, and I always used to think, oh, you're ignoring me. You're always ignoring me. You're always doing other things. The next sub-theme is about feeling unheld in a mother's mind. So the longing to be loved while feeling unknown or unseen by a mother. In Ellie's case, it seemed that her mother's interest was in those of her children and grandchildren who were sexually active or having babies. She said of her mum, people say, oh, it's because she's got a boyfriend now, like that's why you want to pay attention. Megan went on to describe more feelings of being shut out by a preoccupied mother whose attentions and priorities were elsewhere. She said, all I can remember is just screaming at my mum to come and get me. It felt like everyone else came before me all the time. Things that everyone else seems to do, she didn't want to do with me. Natalie conveyed a real lack of entitlement to belong in her mother's mind. And this led to a difficulty in her being able to make use of the mothering that was offered. Interestingly, she described her adoptive family, though she'd been with them since she was 4, as the family I'm with now, something so temporary. She told me, I think I wanted to be loved, and I wanted to love something that wouldn't leave me. Obviously, I know that Jack can leave me whenever, when he's older, but for now, I'm his person. I think I wanted love that I wasn't getting. She expressed so poignantly this need to be loved, alongside doubts about really actually being lovable, and also a fantasy that this need might be answered by a baby's love, which is, of course, quite problematic for the baby in due course. She also expressed this really transient nature of love. In her mind, she could be Jack's person, but just for now. The next sub-theme is about how these mothers have attempted to claim their mother, their endeavours to restore or claim what still remains for them so badly needed. Natalie expressed such surprise at what was available from her adoptive mother, but she was still unsure whether it was for her or for her baby. She said, she now actually makes time for me because I think she knows when she sees me, she'll see him as well. Megan spoke about the painful failure of her attempts to elicit sustained mothering care for herself. And I found it interesting that she ended up finding this in her partner's mum. She said of her mum, she really did make an effort that day, but it was just that day. It seemed to me that Jade was claiming an arm's length, more manageable version of maternal care, something with boundaries by having had a baby. She said, it's made it much better because now it's like she wants to be more involved with me, involved with Caitlin. She's like, when are you next coming up to see me? For Zoe, whose half-brothers had already made her mum a grandmother, it seemed that by becoming pregnant, she might be able to reinforce her own claim on her mum. She described getting pregnant saying, I just said I'm pregnant, and she burst out crying, and she was really excited and happy and gave me a massive hug, and she said she's going to support me in everything. Such joy for her to make her mum a grandmother. It was so interesting for me that in Ellie's memory, it seemed to be she had eclipsed her boyfriend completely from the pregnancy. She said, I don't remember us being pregnant in like a relationship with him. I remember it was just like me and my mum rather than me and him. And this fourth sub-theme of possessing a mother is using motherhood to get mothered, which is always such a useful and interesting idea, and a process I often see in psychotherapy. So Ellie had felt so overlooked, now had her boyfriend, whose turn it was to be left out. She said, when I got pregnant, she, her mum, wanted to buy me clothes. We went out picking out baby stuff. My partner felt left out because he was at school. Given the fact she'd just had a miscarriage, it left me wondering how regularly she'd have to reassert her claim on her mum by having another baby. Natalie seemed to be finding new ways of relating to her adoptive mother through becoming a mother herself. She said, she takes me to the hospital if I need to go for him, or the doctors, or whatever. We get on a lot better since I've been pregnant than not, a lot better. Jade, who was about to give birth to her second child, even though she'd been so emphatic about never having wanted kids, spoke about this mini-me, which seemed to me an idea of grasping at an opportunity to reconfigure some missed elements of her own incomplete experience of being mothered. She said about getting pregnant, I was very excited. I was like, oh my God, is this where I now have to really step up and have my own little mini-me? Megan, who described over and over her disappointment with her mum, also expressed her relief to have found the mothering she needed in her partner's mum. She said, I'm just glad that I have someone there now that really, really cares. But at the same time, she's not my mum. Okay, the second major theme, still all about mothers. It's about separating from a mother. And this pushed out too soon sub-theme is about the experiences of jarring and unwanted transitions of having to separate prematurely. Ellie's account of this was really striking. And this was something she told me about when she was 6 years old. She said, I always used to hold her hand, talking about her mum. And this one time she said to me, Ellie, you got to stop holding my hand now. I felt like I'd drifted away from my mum. So when she said, like, Ellie, I can't hold your hand anymore, I was like, but why? Why can't I? Why can't they let me, just me? It seemed she was so desperately trying to make sense of having to lose something she still so badly needs. And this theme of being dropped and pushed out was there throughout her account. Natalie spoke about being kicked out. She said, I actually got kicked out when I got pregnant. She's already changed my room into an office, so my room literally went a week after I left. Megan talked about an experience of being excluded and pushed away before she was ready. Something about waiting and hoping for more from mum. She said, I didn't understand why I couldn't go. I was always waiting to be like my sister in a way, for mum to treat me same as she treated her. In Jade's case, her mother's hoarding brought her really particular problems because of these rapid shifts between too much and too little. A real difficulty with the flow of what came her way. She told me, being in my own place and just me and obviously Caitlin is very, very lonely. And obviously I went from a crowded house to empty. So it's been very difficult. In psychoanalytic thinking, we think about the tasks of adolescence as being separation, individuation, and identity formation. And this sub-theme gathers up the participants' accounts of trying to reach a safe and workable emotional distance from a mother. It explores the difficulties of the process of finding separateness, depending on the particular nature of each young mother's experience of dependence on or independence from her mother. It seemed that Jade might be seeking autonomy in order to avoid being engulfed. She told me, when my nan died, my mum took in everything of my nan's, and it used to be really packed full of things, and everywhere you turn, you couldn't put something down because something else was there. and how messy, and how much I tried keeping on top of it. Natalie frequently used the expression living a life in the context of her independence from her adoptive mother. She said, "I'm a teenager. I live my life like you've lived yours. You do whatever you want to do. It's now time for me." It seemed to me that Megan had been pushed into autonomy and had to reluctantly accept losing a mother that she felt she couldn't depend on. She said of her baby, "When she was born, I lived with my mum for about 3 days. And then I got so fed up that I moved here with her boyfriend. She was thinking when I first moved in with her that it was going to be like Happy Families, but it wasn't." Really interestingly, Ellie and Zoe appear unready for independence in quite differing ways. And I wondered whether they might be using having a baby as a way of not separating. For Ellie, it seemed she was using her body to draw herself closer to her mum by having a baby. She said, "They knew I was having sex, but because I would speak to my mum about that sort of stuff, like that's how close we are now." In Zoe's case, she seemed worried about her parents' actual survival. She said, "My mum and dad, they didn't think they would get to see me or Kaylee having children." I asked, "They didn't think that they would live long enough to see you have children?" And Zoe said, "No, I don't think so." Thinking about these really jarring endings and these separations, I think in the NFP, it's really crucial to think hard about the endings in our relationships, that these should be planned endings, carefully thought about, nothing jarring. Right, this last sub-theme in separating from a mother is using motherhood to become somebody, and it describes the struggles each participant has faced to find an individual identity for herself, to which maybe becoming a mother had offered a solution. It's becoming somebody when you're feeling like a nobody. For Natalie, it seemed she really had two mothers in her mind, and becoming a mother seemed to serve a complicated purpose of bridging a gap between identifying with both mothers and also proving herself quite different. She said about her birth mother, "She was young, I'm pretty sure, so it's not only to her, it's to everyone that I actually care, and that, well, I'm kind of doing it. So my child's healthy and happy, so just age is not in that really." Ellie seemed to be using motherhood to become valid in her mother's eyes, in a family where she felt quite undifferentiated amongst so many children and grandchildren, so easily lost. She told me, "In our family, someone's always pregnant, always." It seemed that Megan might be finding the purpose and identity that she needs. She said about getting pregnant, "I was very shocked, very, very shocked, but in a way I was quite excited as well, because I knew that this was what I was meant to do. School didn't work out, college didn't work out, maybe being a mum would work out." For Jade, interestingly, becoming a mother seemed to have enabled her to be justified in becoming separate from a mother whose claims could feel quite overwhelming. She said, "She can message me going, 'Oh, come cook for me. I can't. I'm hurting. My back hurts. I don't feel happy.' It's like, 'I'm sorry, Mum, but I can't keep running when you text, because how am I supposed to get my house sorted and tidy?'" Right. Now we move outwards a bit, relating to others. This includes fathers, sisters, and really interestingly, maternal grandmothers. Paternal relationships for all participants, which are complicated by either or vulnerability, violence, and absence, were described in all of the accounts. The fathers do get a look in the accounts, but it's interesting how their roles seem to relate quite strongly to the degree to which they could offer a reliable alternative person for the participant to make use of in order to support and enable her separation from a mother. In Ellie's case, her father's presence in her life really seemed quite flimsy in a way that might provide no moderation from or shelter from her mother's powerful expectations. She told me, I didn't have a relationship with my mum. I only had some sort of relationship with my dad when I used to go out, get a chocolate bar. She also told me that she saw herself as a daddy's girl, which seemed to me quite sadly insubstantial, given that description. What also became really clear was the significant impact on the participants' emotional development of having complicated dynamics between their parents, and the damage that was caused by these young people being drawn into a responsibility for sustaining their parents' relationships. Ellie told me, my mum and dad used to stay separate till I got pregnant, and then they had to go together so we could give Finley a room. Jade's account was quite striking in terms of how she needed to be drawn into her mum and stepdad, who she called dad's relationship, when both of them were really not managing their own lives very well. She told me, Mum rang me saying, me and your dad's just split up. She was obviously upset. I was at college, so I was panicking because I couldn't get home. It's very hard growing up and seeing all the ways he was with alcohol, then the stroke he had, and then coming back from the hospital being told you're not allowed to smoke or drink, and then he continued to do it. And with the news we got the other day, his lungs are filling up with liquid and he needs to stop smoking, otherwise he's going to die, but he seems to still be smoking, which is very scary. Megan described a fantasy of being able to reunite her parents in grandparenthood. She said of a difficult time in her life, her mum would stay in her room all the time, and my dad would stay in the living room, and I would sneak between the two of them to speak to them both. But then in that time as well, I found out I was pregnant. And as with Megan getting pregnant when she was trying to hold her parents together, it's interesting that Jade's parents' separation coincided with her getting pregnant too. In Zoe's case, her parents seem to present a real couple in her mind, but so much so to the extent that they even seem fused. She said about telling them that she was having a baby, their face lit up. And it was just such a proud moment for me to witness. My mum has other grandchildren, but this is my dad's first grandchild. Okay, relating to sisters, it was really fortunate for me in my research that each of the participants had one or more sisters, which offered a really interesting picture of alternatives in this family to pregnancy for separating. Sadly, Zoe, Natalie, and Jade all described, Zoe, Natalie, and Jade all described sisters with significant health difficulties, which kept them at home with their mothers. So that was sad for them. Ellie's sisters each had 4 children whose needs kept the sisters very close to their mother. And only Megan's sister had moved away from mum by going to university. The data that came up on grandmothers was really quite unexpected. All 5 of them spoke about their maternal grandmothers without me asking specifically about them. And Zoe, Megan, and Jade spoke really movingly about the loss of their grandmothers. I felt that I gained more understanding about possible relationships with mothers through what was revealed about their mothers' own experiences of being mothered. And given the preoccupation about mothering that was expressed in all the accounts, I got the sense that maybe having a baby might, in these young women's minds, represent a way of laying down a new point of mothering along a family continuum. So Megan very movingly expressed the hope that she'd had that making her mother a grandmother might replicate what she had so sadly lost. She said, "I thought it was going to be just like me with my nan. I can imagine she was always happy to see me. Things I didn't do with my mum, my nan did with me." And Zoe, who spoke about having witnessed her grandmother's illness and then death, and then the way that the family with the half-brothers had then kind of fallen apart since their grandmother was no longer there to hold the family together, told me, since my nan passed away, he, my brother, just hasn't bothered with us. In Jade's case, the death of her grandmother seems to have quite overwhelmed this very fragile family. She said, "My mum's just gave up. She's always said that she'd rather swap places with her mum. She doesn't want to be here anymore." The participants' family relationships seem perhaps to be simply being repeated and extended by plotting another generation of mothering along this family timeline. And it seemed to me that it might be an attempt at becoming moored through motherhood and providing mooring for families that felt quite insecure. Moving outwards again to the wider family, this encompasses the nieces, cousins, uncles, partners' families that the participants told me about. So for Megan, she's had to find a new family to meet her needs. She told me, "I'm just so grateful that they took me in here. I wouldn't be this happy if I was living with my mum, definitely not. They've done everything for me." Both Jade and Ellie spoke about these large, wider families where individuals seem to get lost and generations got muddled, and this led to a really precarious feeling in both of their descriptions. Ellie had already described the members of the family as the kids are very much similar, and she told me, "Right where I live is like in the middle of them all, but my family continues and continues, so yeah, my family just never stops." Very sadly and disturbingly for Jade, she described a situation where abuse happened and got overlooked, which seemed to describe the really frightening environment and family that she felt she came from, because her mum wasn't able to keep her safe from getting lost amongst so many other people's needs. She said, "The cousin that actually done the most sexual assault to me, he lived actually round the corner from my mum. It was very close by, and I just didn't feel safe." I'll talk briefly about the final theme that came up, which may really resonate with a lot of people who are working with young parents. It's seeking safety through motherhood. All of the accounts describe danger and fear in relationships because of illness and/or violence. And they conveyed a sense of being really unsafe in a dangerous feeling world. And they all expressed hopes that by having a baby, they might satisfy their yearning to feel secure. Understandably, in the context of fear and vulnerability, it seemed that adult life could feel really precarious and threatening for these young women, with becoming a mother offering a route to relative safety. And it was really striking that each participant felt that she had made very real improvements in her life and her perceived levels of personal safety through becoming a mother. And each had, for now, used motherhood to claim something safer and steadier for herself, something where damaged relationships could be repaired and a mother could be reclaimed. So Natalie, who'd had to be so tough to survive as an adopted child, described having a baby to belong with and to comfort her. She said, "If I'm sad, I can just cuddle him." She'd also reinstated herself more safely in her adoptive family. She told me, "And there was no arguing. Everyone was happy and talking." Megan had found safety in her boyfriend's family by having a baby, and it also seemed so apparent how frightening the world outside still seemed to her. She said of her boyfriend's mum, I can go to her with everything, anything at all. I think if, for example, if I crashed a car or something like that, she'd be the first person I rang. It wouldn't be my mum anymore. It'd be her, because since I've met her, she's been the one person that has really stuck by me and been there for every day for me. I'm so emotional. Without them, I don't know what I would have done. I think I'd be living in a young mum's hostel, to be honest. For Ellie, it seemed that by conforming to a family culture of having babies, Ellie had returned to the relative safety of having a mother who again cared for her. She said, she's obviously been there for me with like the health side of it. She wanted to be there. Zoe described to me a terrible event that happened while she was pregnant with her baby. And the arrival of her baby seemed to offer a way to soothe the family in shock in her mind. She told me it was a hard time for us, so definitely having Charlotte. She's brought a lot of happiness to us. So those are all of my major themes. And as I was thinking of preparing this to speak to you today, I thought about the motto that the Family Nurse Partnership had at the time when I worked there, which is changing the world one baby at a time. And I thought about a kind of formulation from my findings and how it might work with what I wanted to talk to you about. I really developed a richer understanding of the intentions and the value of the NFP by doing this research, particularly around the unfolding therapeutic relationship that's made between the family nurse and the client, which is so absolutely at the center of the work and forms a base, even while all sorts of other things are also being done, because it holds open a crucial space to think about the baby's needs. And it's so important to draw the mother's attention to the baby's separateness and individuality, to who she or he may be as a person. And it made me remember some of the NFP activities about difference, which really seem particularly important and relevant to my research findings. Because when there are such powerful familial cycles of expectations, projections, and assumptions that I heard about, then noticing differences allows for who this particular child is. And it also, crucially, addresses the baby's developing need for separateness that really needs to be thought about. So I developed this little, not very well done cycle. And I thought about the focus on remembering and reflecting, which forms a key and reparative aspect in the developing relationship between the client and the family nurse, which then offers the nurse the opportunity to play a vital role by paying close attention to the client's particular experiences, to her journey to pregnancy and motherhood, to her family history, her relationships, her hopes, her preferences, her needs and anxieties, which leads to a getting to know process, which is experienced, which in turn helps the client to become more curious about who her baby is. So, having explored her own experiences, a space can be held open for thinking about the baby's needs and individuality, which in turn leads to the baby's needs being better met as she or he experiences being known and understood, and is so less projected into as some kind of proxy for his or her mother's needs, which then leads to multi-generational parenting and relationship difficulties, really entrenched ones, and deficits beginning to be reworked and repaired, one experience of being mothered at a time. I think that the process of this happening offers a profoundly important possibility of changing the world one mother at a time, and so one baby at a time, and improving the world one experience of being mothered at a time. that's the end of my presentation, just with a link to my paper in the Journal of Child Psychotherapy and some of the papers that I found so helpful when I was working for the Family Nurse Partnership in thinking about unconscious features of becoming a mother. And also, I've included an adaptation of some of my questions that I had as ideas and prompts when I put together my research questions, which might be helpful for encouraging mothers to reflect on their own experiences of coming to motherhood and also about their babies. So that's me finished. If someone else would like to unmute, I will stop sharing my slides.
Thank you, Hen. Thank you, Dr. Otley. Throughout your entire time speaking, I had my camera off, but I was giving the phenomenological nod, and thinking about, as you spoke and shared these voices and quotes of the five individuals who shared so much of their time and their life story with you, that I imagine many of us were listening, were not only seeing these experiences and narratives reflected in their clients, but maybe some themes within their own lives. Even as you were reading quotes, one particular one from Natalie, I could just feel the emotion welling up. And what you have shared with us today, I think, is fundamentally about a deep human need to be seen, to be understood, and most importantly, to be loved. So thank you for sharing these findings with us and those questions for reflection for practice. And now in our remaining time, I'm first going to ask Dr. David Olds, who is the founder of Nurse Family Partnership, to provide just a couple of minutes of reflection on your findings and your research. And then I'm going to open up the panel or open up the discussion to questions and answers for Dr. Otley. So if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat, and I will select a few questions to moderate a discussion. Dr. Olds. Oh, we can't hear you, David. I'm not sure why.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. First of all, let me just say this. If it's okay with you, Dr. Otley, I'd like to be able to refer to you as Hen,
Yes, please.
and you got to refer to me as David. So, okay. Let me just say that I am so moved by your presentation, and it just reminds me how critical it is for this program to be individualized. This is not a prescriptive program where you walk in to the family and you say, "Well, this is what you should be doing today." It really is grounded in this, um, if you want, strengths-based framework that is, but really is grounded on the nurses taking the time to really understand this mother and and her own child rearing history and her current relationships with other family members and so forth, all of which the nurses take into consideration in trying to craft and help this mother navigate a healthy start for her baby and for her life. I've been at this for a little while, nearly 50 years. And so one of the themes that just I hear over and over and over again is that the mothers will say, "No one has ever cared for me the way you've cared for me." And I think that this opportunity for nurses to form this caring, consistent, guiding, reflective relationship with mothers and fathers and maybe grandmothers is fundamental, is crucial. It's the foundation on which this program is built. It really requires that kind of interpersonal sensitivity that you express and that nurses need in order to be able to be to be effective. And that's why we've built this STAR framework as a foundation for the program. And it's really designed to dig into um, these issues at the beginning of the program. It's why we have 4 sequential weekly visits for the nurse and mother to get to know one another. And you so beautifully have dug into this so much more than nurses have the time to really, even nurses in this program have the time to really explore. But I think um, it's the goal of those first 4 visits is to really be able to understand this mother's personal history and her aspirations. And so thank you so much for taking the FNP NFP model and digging into it the way you have. I think that I didn't have a chance to look at those questions that you presented at the end of your presentation, but my guess is that they are very thoughtful because of the very thoughtful presentation you just gave. And there may be a way of integrating those questions into the clinical design of the program as we go forward. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. And I hope that in some ways what I've just said will stimulate I'm sure that lots of other people have lots of thoughts and about your presentation. So let's make it go forward.
Thank you, David. Hen, any reaction to what David has said before I engage in the questions that have been sent to me and some of the ones that are in the chat?
Yeah, I was very moved by what David said, and it seems that the foundations of the Family Nurse Partnership are so in keeping with. I mean, I'm aware that there's so much that family nurses have to do, and there are so many. I remember myself so many demands and expectations from commissioners and boxes you've got to tick. But it is so valuable to know that really what's at the heart of it is this consistent relationship, and the relationship that each family nurse will be building with each client is absolutely crucial in who she's going to be as a mother. And it is so much more than I've done in my single interview with each of these participants, where they have told me so much. And I've really, in Ellie's question, I asked her one question and then the rest just came pouring out. So I think a lot of these young people are just so ready to talk about themselves to someone who's curious and interested and has the time. So it's kind of forging the time in between all the other things that we have to do, but also having a lot of faith in what you're offering as the nurse and the value of what you're offering and what you're bringing of yourself to this young person's life.
And Hen, following up, reflecting on what David has shared about the importance of the first 4 visits and what you're speaking about in the development of this relationship. In many of the NFP, FNP programs, in those early home visits, nurses have the option to complete a life history calendar or a life history timeline with clients. And one of the nursing functions of creating a life history calendar is they can identify historical risks or historical events that might be risk indicators for future challenges.
Mm.
And the life history calendar timeline also really creates a space for the nurse to come to know the client and her history as they start this relationship. And in the guidance instructions, nurses start by giving the client choice and control to develop the timeline in any way they wish. You know, saying, put your birth date down and today's date at two ends of the paper, and start to think about three important events in your life and map those down, and we'll start to connect the dots. And nurses ask open-ended questions around those events. You know, who was there to support you during that time? Where were you living? And so within the context of doing a life history calendar, I saw and I was taking screenshots of your questions, even though I know we can get your slides later. But if a nurse only had, you know, they're asking a lot of questions, what might be two powerful open-ended nursing questions within the context of creating a life history timeline that the nurse could ask that would allow the client to reflect on the meaning of how they were mothered?
Mm. Well, I suppose for the client to take it in whatever way she's ready to take it in, something very open-ended, which might start, I'd be really interested to know something about your childhood relationships. Could you tell me something about that? And it may be that they will tell you they had a favorite cat, or they might tell you a long story, which might be very powerful. And I'm just thinking that idea that you are using yourself and you are judging what's the responses that you're getting from this client. I'm thinking of Jade, who could feel so easily intruded on by a mother. You will get a sense whether you're overstepping, whether you need to pull back, whether you can ask something quite direct. I quite like your idea of just plotting, you know, now and then. Tell me something about what comes between.
Yeah, it's the power of an open-ended question. You never know where it goes, and it allows the client to have the control of the narrative that they share and what they feel safe to share at that time. So
And I
thank
think the prompt, which, I mean, I only gave you one question and there was a very open one, but the prompt, I think it's demonstrating the interest and the time to be interested. So when something's told to you, then if some more encouragement is needed to show that you're interested, just something like, could you tell me more about that?
Great, thank you. Sometimes I think we make our practices complex where really it's showing, being genuine, showing interest, and approaching these conversations without any judgment. I appreciated in my own research how many young mothers have talked about how they just feel judged in every space that they go to. Yet the nurse is often that person that comes to this work with no assumptions about them or judgments. So thank you. So I'm going to turn to one of the questions in the chat. And it says, you mention a double crisis of adolescence and motherhood, which I agree is such a formative time. My question is, how can we influence the assumptions made by other professionals when at the same time the adolescent mother themselves are not aware of any challenges or risks for themselves or their baby? It often feels like a very difficult balance.
Mm. I think it's very interesting because we don't stigmatize adolescent sex anymore, but we really do stigmatize having a baby in adolescence. And in the same way that these young mothers have been, the ones in my research, really overly projected into by their own mothers without sufficient interest being taken in who this person is, we really risk as a society projecting more into young mothers. You know, they've already taken their load of projections, and now we see a young mother pushing a pram down the street, and we know that they're receiving everyone else's assumptions about what kind of a person they are and what kind of a mother they're going to be. So I think the best way when we're thinking about other professionals' assumptions, might be storytelling. You know, you told such a thoughtful story at the beginning of the presentation about the Orange Shirt Day. To share with commissioners individual stories of individual clients who are being worked with, so we don't have so much of an experience of othering young parents, but of seeing them as particular, different to each other.
Thank you. And I hope as I'm reading these questions, you're getting a chance to see in the chat. So many people who are here today are just speaking to the validation of your findings, how they're really, the narratives you shared have just resonated with them. So another question that was sent in ahead of time was, which relationships provide the most support to an individual who chooses to be a mother? What might hold the most influence on when someone becomes a mother?
Well, in my research, it was mothers, mothers, mothers. You know, that seemed to be so powerful. And then, as I said, fathers mainly in their role of, are they able to moderate what happens between the mother and the child? So I think mothers were the most powerful, really front and center in my research. I think you also can't underestimate, because of the centrality of the mother's role, your role as a family nurse, because you are taking on a mothering role. And often it will be a mothering role in the context of something which hasn't been steady and consistent, and you're offering something really very steadying. So I do think there is a huge role to be played by family nurses around subsequent pregnancies.
And how so? Can you expand?
Just by the idea of, we keep repeating what we haven't worked through. So if someone is having a baby in order to try and draw their mother to them, for instance, like Ellie was, to keep their mother interested, to be able to think about what might be happening, why this is happening, what it is they want from their mum, how it's going to have to be repeated every 2 years, and how ultimately disappointing it is, offers a possibility of doing something different, of waiting until you might be more ready.
These are such profound and life-altering conversations, right? That power of nursing and the power of this relationship and listening.
Yes.
So another question, as nurses engage in these discussions with their clients about their experiences with their mothers or being mothered, as well as the details of their childhood relationships, do you have any tips or strategies on how nurses can do this work without re-traumatizing clients? And nurses are, it's not, in most countries, I imagine, not within the scope of a nurse's practice to, do trauma therapy, but they practice in trauma and violence informed ways. How do we create up that context so that there's not a re-traumatization?
I think it's about going at the client's pace and showing a gentle and gradual curiosity, which builds. So gathering and building of understanding over time and gaining a sense of how you're being received, really. Is your interest welcome, or does it seem to be intrusive? Is it too fast, too slow? And giving yourself the benefit of knowing that you're going to be with this client for 2 years or however long it's going to be. And also giving the client an experience that they might not have had enough of before, of knowing that they are in your mind, that you have remembered aspects of what they've told you, that you can bring back aspects which are really particular to them. And I remember having some very good advice from the psychotherapist who used to offer psychotherapy supervision for us when I worked in Swindon FMP, which was to spend a few minutes, maybe as you're driving over to the visit or just when you get to the front door, gathering up aspects of this particular young person in your mind, remembering what happened last time, what the name of their baby, their boyfriend, their grandmother is, what's going on for them, so that they have an experience of being in your mind, of being received and thought about, and of your growing interest and developing interest in them being safe and rewarding without anything which might be humiliating or traumatic. Yeah, just the value of gathering up your thoughts to pause before the visit. And so they then get an experience of an interest which is genuine and kindly, which is very nourishing.
And again, being seen, right? If someone comes in and genuinely remembers who you are and specific aspects of your life, how validating that must be, particularly for those young girls that describe coming from large families or, just being nobody, right? And the nurse makes them feel somebody. And I want to share with you one of the comments in the chat, because all of a sudden my brain was going, oh, parallel process and all these over levels, different levels of complexity if nurses are seen within a therapeutic boundary in the mothering role. The comment was, I think what I have found interesting with second pregnancies, considering how the family nurse might be seen in a mothering role, is how often the client has considered then how the family nurse might react when they tell their family nurse they're pregnant again.
Mm. Yes, because there might be a fantasy that by getting pregnant again, you get to sustain the relationship with the family nurse, that she can't possibly go away if you're having another baby because she's still needed.
Yeah, and also for some, I wonder a fear of judgment, right? If there's a
Mm.
focus
Yeah.
a fear of judgment if had been a focus on
Mm.
family planning or contraception. And
Mm.
interestingly, in some of our early interviews, when we were developing the intimate partner violence intervention, we heard a common theme when we interviewed young mothers in the States around understanding when and how young mothers choose to disclose to their nurse that they're experiencing intimate partner violence in their relationship. And there were a few interviews I recall where the client said, I still don't think my nurse knows because I don't want to let her down.
Oh.
Right. And that was just the perspective that I was thinking of as when I read this comment, right? They're like, I don't want to let the nurse down by telling her what's actually happening in my life. So it speaks to, again, of how important it is for us to not be judgmental and always create that space of being able to share.
And to recognize our kind of professional mothering role. I think it is a mothering role. There's no getting away from it.
Yes, yes. Yes. Okay. And I'm just seeing, I'm just quickly looking through the comments. Lots of validation. So I will ask you one last question before we end. One of the things I heard you say was the importance of not having a jarring ending to NFP, FNP practice. And it's my understanding in most jurisdictions or countries, the program continues until baby's second birthday. And the program model is set up that the visits start to tailor towards the end. There's more space. There's an emphasis on self-efficacy, supporting clients to know that they can navigate systems now. But not all endings tie up nicely with a bow. And I suspect that there's some clients that don't feel ready to be discharged. I'm sure there's some nurses or family visitors that don't feel clients are ready to be discharged. Any guidance then, given your comment around these jarring endings, on some very practical strategies on how nurses, midwives, family visitors can prepare to say goodbye?
I think it's just about planning. It's about both knowing what's coming, maybe even a countdown. We've now got 6 visits left or whatever it might be. What are we going to do in that time? So there's no surprises, no a kind of mitigation of a sense of being rejected or dumped. Something steady and unsurprising, where the mourning of the loss, the grieving of an ending can be thought about. Because I think you can't overestimate how valued the family nurses are in the minds of their clients, and the clients really are losing something valued. And I wonder if it's helpful to think about it a little bit like a weaning. We think you wouldn't take a baby off the breast or start feeding it solid food all in one go. You would let that child slowly get used to it. So coming back and going back out again. And obviously with the child, you're not telling them exactly when it's ending, but there's a kind of a gradual process of letting go that can happen.
And I think that's reflecting on what you've just shared, how important it is for nurses and supervisors and all of us to remember that for many of these mothers, if they've had experiences of abandonment, of people just leaving them in their lives, and in NFP and in nursing practice, I believe we spend an inordinate amount of time in supporting nurses to have the skills on how to develop a therapeutic relationship and how to maintain a therapeutic relationship. But I really, in my experience at least, which is just a very small one, I don't think we've spent the same amount of time and energy on supporting nurses to really think about how to safely and effectively end a therapeutic relationship. And you've really highlighted these, like, this is a population that may have experienced abandonment or inconsistent mothers or people in their lives. And maybe this also helps us to understand why, and again, I'm not a psychotherapist, so I'm just imagining, but maybe this also helps to explain why sometimes clients disappear before the end of the program, 3, 4 months out. They
Yeah.
just, and I've heard this from nurses anecdotally, the client just disappears
Mm.
towards the end.
She wants to do the dumping rather than be dumped. She wants for once to be in control. And sometimes a client needs to do that. She needs to communicate her need to be the one in charge of a relationship. And if she needs to do that, then that's therapeutic for her.
And so it speaks to then how in the planning do you provide that control and choice and opportunities, right? How does the mother want to acknowledge or celebrate or again have some control over that?
Yeah.
Oh, you've given us so much to think about, Hen, and this has been a wonderful presentation. I appreciate that it's also created the opportunity for all of us to hear qualitative research. NFP globally is respected because of its the foundations of evidence that underpin the program and what we know about how the program influences outcomes for mothers and children. But equally, qualitative research gives us insights into people's experiences. It gives us new conceptual understanding or insights, those aha moments of what it is like, in this case, to be a new mother, to be a young mother. And I think those insights help us think differently. It changes how we approach our practice and allow all of us, whether we're researchers, administrators, supervisors, or nurses, really to be more compassionate and empathic in understanding what it's like to walk in the shoes of a young mother. So thank you for joining us today, for sharing this work. It's so powerful. And again, I see the comments and it's really resonated with everyone. So thank you, Dr. Otley. Dr. Olds, thank you for your commentary. Brooke and Anna, thank you so much for navigating registration and coordinating this event. And to everyone else, stay tuned. We will have announcements and dates and registration for our next webinar series. So to all of you, whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, I wish you a good rest of the day. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure and privilege to speak to you all about my research.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.